Why was the mountain so quiet? Had learned since childhood that silence in the wilderness was never natural. Birds should have been calling, deer rustling in the brush, wind moving freely between the pines. But tonight, in the pre-dawn dark, the Montana woods felt like a cathedral stripped of life. She lay pressed against the frozen ground, her cheek against the earth, the barrel of her rifle cooling against her gloved hands. A Ford pickup, her grandfather's old truck, stood between her and the shadows on the ridge. Its body was riddled with fresh bullet holes. Somewhere out there, 3 black SUVs blocked the only road down the mountain. Her pulse slowed. A voice carried through the stillness, male, confident, cold. I've got visual on the 3rd generation. Command wants her alive. They weren't talking about any deer. They were talking about her. Adjusted her grip on the battered rifle she'd carried since she was 13. She closed her eyes, not in fear, in concentration, wind 3 east, barometric pressure dropping, soil vibrations, 2 men moving, one left, one closing in too fast. She didn't need a scope. She pivoted, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. A scream cut through the trees. Chaos, shouts, one of them down, another voice cursing in disbelief. Jesus Christ, she hit Mitchell blind. Didn't wait to confirm. She was already moving, rolling into the shadows, sliding into the pines. For a moment, gunfire sprayed after her, bullets splintering bark where her head had been. Then the forest swallowed her. And as she melted into the darkness, she heard it. One of her hunters, his voice hard with something between awe and dread. She's showing abilities beyond 2nd generation. The bloodline, it's stronger than we thought. Bloodline. That word. Her chest tightened as she sprinted, lungs pulling icy air like knives. She wanted to scream at them, tell them she was just a ranch girl, a hunter who'd grown up in the Montana wild. But the voice inside her, the one she'd tried to bury for years, whispered the truth. They weren't wrong. 72 hours earlier, she hadn't been a target. She'd been standing on a ridge with Carl, a 70-year-old guide with leathery skin and sharp eyes, hunting mule deer. Nothing more. Sweet Jesus, had muttered when the buck fell, clean heart shot, 1,200 yards away. He looked at her like she wasn't even human. Nobody makes that shot, not with that old rifle. Nobody human anyway. Had lowered the weapon, her face unreadable. She was 29, 5'4", petite enough to disappear in a crowd. But her eyes gave her away. Eyes that had seen bullets carve paths through the air before the trigger was pulled. Eyes that could feel the weight of distance. My grandfather would made it, she'd said softly. William had asked, almost reverent. Special Forces, Cold War, I knew him. The words had made her chest tighten with that familiar blend of pride and grief. William hadn't just raised her after the so-called plane crash that killed her parents. He'd trained her, molded her, made her into something she couldn't explain. And had seen it. He dropped his voice to a whisper, like a priest sharing a forbidden gospel. What you've got, it ain't natural, girl. Your grandfather had it too. Ever hear of Operation Olympian? Had shaken her head, hands freezing on the rifle. Never heard of it. But inside, a memory flickered. Her grandfather's tired eyes warning her, if men in suits ever come, don't let them find you. And then, almost on cue, she'd heard the sound. Helicopter rotors slicing the air, had looked skyward with dread, his face ashen. Too soon, he'd whispered, they found you. He'd pressed a metal key into her hand, hurried and desperate. North Barn, under the old hay. Your grandfather said you'd need it one day. Go now, don't look back. He walked east to mislead them, leaving tracks in the soft dirt. She hadn't even said goodbye. Now 72 hours later was gone, maybe dead, maybe captured, and was running, hunted for a secret she didn't understand. She stumbled through the dark timber, ribs aching, breath tearing at her throat. She'd memorized every inch of these woods since childhood, but tonight they felt foreign, unsafe. Her safe places had been burned away by headlights, gunfire, and the whisper of men who wanted her alive. She thought of the key, heavy, cold in her pocket, a secret waiting in the north barn, but she couldn't go back, not yet, they'd be waiting. Her only choice was forward, further into the mountains, further into the silence. Yet with each step memories rose unbidden. William's voice, trust no one, not even me someday, the way he'd flinched at the word government, the way his hands had trembled when she'd asked about her father. Michael, they'd said, a commercial pilot, dead in a crash with her mother, but hadn't she always felt it was a lie? Her breath fogged in the freezing air. Her legs trembled. Exhaustion clawed at her, but she pressed on deeper until the gunfire faded behind her. She collapsed against a fallen pine, clutching her rifle, shaking. For a long moment she just listened. To the trees, to the faint whistle of wind, to the truth she'd been avoiding her whole life. Something was coming for her, something her grandfather had tried and failed to keep at bay. Dawn bled over the mountains hours later, painting the peaks gold, crouched on a ridge overlooking her grandfather's ranch. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, but in the driveway, a black SUV sat like a predator at rest. Through her scope she saw them, two men in suits, not FBI, not police. Their movements too precise, their search too clinical. Not law hunters. Her pulse quickened. William's voice echoed in her mind. If they say they're government, they are, but not the kind that follows laws. She needed to reach the north barn, but getting past them meant moving like a ghost. The barn loomed like a memory, weathered wood, sagging roof, the smell of hay and dust. She slipped inside, every sense on fire. Dust hung in beams of pale light, rusted tools, the smell of earth, her grandfather's world. She dug through hay, fingers raw, until she found it, boards that looked ordinary but weren't. The key fit perfectly. A click, a hidden door, a ladder descending into darkness. Her breath caught. For a moment she almost turned back, but she descended, pulling the hatch closed above her. The beam of her flashlight swept across an underground bunker, metal cabinets, dust-covered cots, radios that belonged in a museum, and in the silence her grandfather's ghost. "What were you hiding, Grandpa?" she whispered. Her hands trembled as she pulled open a cabinet. Folders, photos, names. Olympian team, Phase I, 1962. Her grandfather in uniform, standing with men whose eyes carried secrets. Another folder. Subject WB07, William notes, medical records, serum, enhancements, genetic markers. Her stomach turned cold. She kept digging. Subject RB01, Robert, terminated 2001. She froze, Robert, her father. And then another folder. Subject CB01, Claire, her birth certificate. But the parents weren't Michael and Susan. They listed her father as Robert, her mother as dead in childbirth. Her world cracked. Michael had never been her father. William had lied. And Robert, terminated by something called, had been real, her father. She collapsed into the chair by the old desk, clutching the papers, shaking so hard she thought she'd break. Everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. And then her eyes fell on a final envelope, for Claire when the time comes. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter, her grandfather's writing, jagged, familiar. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, the shadows have found you. I lied to protect you. I am your grandfather, but Michael was a fiction. Your real father was Robert. He inherited abilities beyond mine. They killed him for it. They will come for you too. Trust no one. You are the last free Olympian." The last free Olympian. Her chest ached as the truth settled over her like the mountain snow. She wasn't just a ranch girl. She wasn't just a hunter. She was the third generation of something unnatural, something hunted. And as heavy footsteps echoed across the barn floor above, she realized her grandfather had been right. The day had come. sat frozen in the dark bunker, gripping her father's sniper rifle like a lifeline. A TAC-50, pristine, impossible, a weapon meant for distances others couldn't dream of. Above her voices, boots, the scrape of metal. "Area clear," one called. "Negative," another replied. "Heat signature below ground." Her hiding place was gone. She pulled the lever hidden behind the radios. Concrete shifted, a tunnel opened. And as light spilled into the bunker, she crawled into the darkness, clutching the rifle, the letter, and the unbearable weight of truth. The hunt had begun. What do you do when the truth becomes heavier than the rifle in your hands? Lay in the mud, her breath ragged, the old TAC-50 pressed against her chest. The tunnel had carried her out through an irrigation pipe half a mile from the barn, but it hadn't carried away the truth. Her life, her name, her father, it had all been built on a lie. The letter from William burned in her pocket. "You are the last free Olympian." Free? She laughed bitterly under her breath. Nothing about her felt free anymore. The forest stretched before her, cold and indifferent. Somewhere behind her, men in suits searched the barn she had just fled, their voices clipped, efficient, professional. She had seen hunters before, deer, elk, even men chasing their own demons. But these men weren't hunters. They were predators, and she was the quarry. She wanted to keep running, to vanish deeper into the wilderness and never be seen again. But even as she thought it, she knew they would keep coming. She would never be free. So she stayed low, studied the terrain, and made a choice. She would stop running. She would start learning. 3 nights later, exhaustion had carved deep lines into her face. She lived on snowmelt and jerky from her pack, slept in shallow bursts against tree trunks, and fought the constant whisper of paranoia. Every shadow moved. Every branch crack sounded like pursuit. Twice they had nearly cornered her. Twice her senses, sharpened, unnatural, had given her just enough warning. And now at dawn she crouched behind the wreck of her grandfather's truck. Bullets had turned its body into a sieve, headlights shattered, windshield starred with cracks. A relic of her past, now a shield against the present. SUVs blocked the road ahead, black and menacing. Headlights cut through the mist. Men moved in their glow like silhouettes of inevitability. "Delta Team status report," a voice barked through their comms. "Target cornered," another voice replied. "Unexpected resistance. 1 operative down. Abilities exceed projections. Confirmed 3rd-generation expression." The words twisted in her chest. 3rd-generation expression. To them she wasn't human, she was data, a project. The whoop-whoop of helicopter blades carried on the wind. Reinforcements, extraction. She checked her ammo, not enough. Her muscles trembled with fatigue. She couldn't fight forever. Her eyes fell on the rifle, her father's, the one William had hidden. She thought of his warning. Use it only if absolutely necessary. Was this it? She aimed downrange, but her hands shook, not from fear but from something deeper. If she fired, if she killed, what then? More would come. There was no end to them. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the shooting started, she let herself feel the weight of it all. The grief for a father she'd never known. The betrayal of a grandfather who had lied. The hollow ache of being reduced to a bloodline. She was so tired of being hunted. And so she made a decision that cut against every survival instinct she had. She stood, hands raised, rifle abandoned in the mud. Her voice carried across the clearing. "I'm coming out, don't shoot." The SUV spotlight locked onto her instantly. The bullhorn cracked to life. "On your knees, hands behind your head." She obeyed, knees sinking into the cold earth, fingers interlaced behind her neck. Boots crunched toward her, shadows loomed. One man knelt, zip-tying her wrists. Another pulled a blindfold tight across her eyes. And then she felt it, a sharp sting in her arm, a needle. Her breath caught, she wanted to scream, but her body betrayed her, growing heavy, sluggish, slow. The last thing she heard before the world slipped into black was a voice. Calm, cold, satisfied. General Wilson will be pleased. The Olympian bloodline continues. When she awoke, the world was white, sterile. A hospital bed beneath her, monitors beeping softly. The air stank of antiseptic and false promises. She tested her wrists discreetly, strapped, not military restraints, medical ones designed for patients. A subtle distinction, but a distinction all the same. The door opened with a hiss. A woman entered, white lab coat, hair pulled into a severe bun, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She moved like she belonged, clinical, detached. Subject is conscious, she said into a recorder, not even looking at. Vital signs stable, cognitive function normal. No adverse effects from transport sedation. Where am I? Demanded, her voice raw. The woman finally met her eyes. You're in a secure facility. My name is Dr. Richards. You're here for evaluation, for your protection. Laughed, bitter and broken. Protection? Your men chased me through the woods, they shot at me. They drugged me, that's not protection. A regrettable miscommunication, Richards replied smoothly, unbothered. The field team was overzealous. You're not a prisoner, miss. You're a person of exceptional interest. Narrowed her eyes. Because of my shooting abilities. Richards' gaze sharpened. Yes, scores statistically impossible without specialized training, abilities that can't be explained by mere practice. Your grandfather was William, was he not? Felt her chest tighten. Richards knew she knew. She forced herself to remain steady. He didn't talk much about the past. A flicker passed across Richards' face. Surprise, calculation, maybe even sorrow. William was a remarkable man. His service went far beyond what most will ever know. Before could respond, the door hissed again. A man entered. Silver hair cropped short. Army general's uniform, ribbons heavy on his chest. He moved with the sharp grace of someone who had commanded men all his life. His eyes found hers instantly, hard, piercing, assessing. Dr. Richards, he said, preliminary assessment. Subject displays expected markers, Richards replied crisply. Blood confirms third-generation expression. Cognitive functions enhanced, especially spatial awareness. Excellent, the man stepped closer. His voice dropped, direct, cutting. Miss, I am General Wilson. Welcome to Project Artemis. Met his gaze, unflinching. What is Project Artemis, and why did you hunt me down? Wilson smiled faintly. Direct, just like your grandfather. He folded his hands behind his back, packing slowly. Project Artemis is the successor to a program from the Cold War, Operation Olympian. The name hit her like a rifle shot. Olympian, the word had whispered, the word in William's files. You mean the program that turned men into test animals, she said coldly. Volunteers, Wilson corrected, his tone hardening. Patriots, men who gave themselves to give this nation an edge against the Soviets. Your grandfather among them, one of our best. And now you want me, she said. Wilson stopped packing, studying her with unnerving calm. You're unique, miss. You can see what our best computers cannot, feel what our instruments cannot measure. You are the next step in human evolution. Her stomach twisted. You make me sound like a weapon. You make yourself sound smaller than you are, Wilson replied, his voice low, almost paternal. You are not just a marksman. You are proof of what humanity can become. Felt her jaw tighten. Proof, weapon, asset, never person. What if I refuse? She asked. Wilson spread his hands in a gesture of openness. Then you are free to leave. We'll provide compensation, an apology for the manner of your recruitment. Too clean, too easy. She didn't believe him, not for a second. But she knew one thing. Inside was the only place she could learn the truth, about her father, about why William had lied to her. So she let her shoulders soften, let her voice crack just slightly. I want to understand what I am. If you can give me those answers, I'll cooperate." Wilson's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Excellent. Dr. Richards will oversee your evaluation. Tomorrow you begin orientation." And then he turned, leaving her with a single look that felt less like approval and more like ownership. The door closed. Richards stepped forward, a syringe in her hand. "Standard immunization package," she explained. Narrowed her eyes. "What's really in it?" Richards hesitated, then almost admiringly, "Perceptive, a tracking isotope, harmless, detectable if you wander off." Gave a bitter half-smile. "At least you're honest." She extended her arm, letting the needle slide into her skin. Inside, her resolve hardened. She wasn't a guest, she wasn't an asset, she wasn't even a prisoner. She was a spy, and she would burn Project Artemis from the inside out. How do you play the role of willing captive when every instinct tells you to run? Sat in the transport helicopter, its rotors thundering against the Nevada sky. 3 hours since leaving Montana. 3 hours with 2 armed escorts at her side, their eyes fixed ahead, not speaking. 3 hours of staring out the window at nothing but desert, barren ridges rising like scars from the earth. Dr. Richards sat opposite her, face washed pale by the glow of a tablet. She hadn't spoken either. Didn't need to. Her silence was its own authority, clinical and unyielding. Feigned calm, hands loose in her lap, mind running faster than the helicopter blades. The isotope Richards had injected tracked her every move. The rifle, her father's, was buried in Montana beneath a fallen tree, hidden but not forgotten. And in her boot, wrapped tight in fabric, William's letter. "You are the last free Olympian." Free, she clung to that word like oxygen. The helicopter banked sharply, descending, leaned closer to the window. At first she saw only desert. Endless sand, jagged stone, horizon without end. But then subtle details, roads carved into the earth and painted to blend with sand. Communications arrays disguised as boulders, and carved into the side of a mesa, almost invisible until they were nearly on top of it, steel doors, retracting as the helicopter descended. Facility 7, Project Artemis's hidden heart. The skid struck concrete, the rotors slowed. "Welcome to your new home," Richards said at last, her voice as flat as the desert horizon. Inside, the mesa became steel and glass, corridors washed in antiseptic white, soldiers in gray tactical uniforms moving with rigid precision, cameras in every corner. The air smelled like recycled sterility, too clean, almost artificial. Kept her expression neutral, cataloging details, guard positions, surveillance coverage, keypad codes flashed by careless hands. Every detail was a weapon if memorized. She was led to her quarters, a small room, clean but impersonal. Bed, desk, a wardrobe with gray uniforms folded with mechanical precision. The door had no lock on the inside. She noted the cameras, one obvious, one hidden in a vent, a microphone concealed in the lamp. She nodded politely as Richards explained schedules, meals at 600, 1200, 1800, training at 7:30. Strict routines. "Rest tonight," Richards said before leaving. "Tomorrow, evaluation begins." When the door sealed shut, flushed the pill Richards had given her down the sink, then lay back on the bed. Her body stilled but her mind sharpened, using meditation her grandfather had drilled into her. To the cameras, she looked asleep. In truth, she was planning, mapping, waiting. But the door opened again, quiet, too quiet. She kept her breathing steady. "Sedatives working," a male voice whispered. "Vitals steady," another replied. "Richards wants baseline blood samples." She felt the needle pierce her arm, felt the vials fill. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Olympian blood ran strange, resistant to common drugs. William had told her once after she'd shrugged off painkillers as a child. "Your body rejects what others accept. Remember that." Now it saved her. She let them take the blood, then slip away. Only when the door sealed again did she open her eyes, staring into the sterile ceiling. So much for being a guest. Morning came with brutal precision. Lights snapped on at 5:30, harsh and artificial. A speaker in the ceiling announced protocols like the voice of some faceless god. Dressed in the uniform provided, gray tactical fabric with a circle insignia on the shoulder, a stylized archer bow drawn, Artemis. Her designation stenciled beneath the patch, CB01. Asset not person, asset. She joined the others in the cafeteria. The room buzzed with conversation but fell momentarily silent when she entered. 30 people, maybe more, in matching uniforms. Most were ordinary staff, technicians, guards, but 4 others bore the same asset insignia. She collected a tray of eggs, toast, fruit, sat alone at a table that gave her sight lines across the room. Eyes tracked her, weighing her, measuring her. 2 approached. The man was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, athletic, a soldier's bearing. The woman was leaner, sharper, her eyes cool and calculating. "Mind if we sit?" the man asked, though he was already setting his tray down. Gave a faint smile. "Free country." The woman smirked at the irony. "I'm Michael Reed," the man said, offering a nod. "Former SEAL Team 6, this is Wilson, ex-Marine sniper." She replied, "Montana ranch hand." "Ranch hand," repeated, skeptical. Her badge read TW02. "Funny. Ranch hands don't hit impossible scores at competitions. That's what triggered the protocol." Shrugged, "My grandfather taught me." Michael leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let me guess, grandfather was military, Cold War, Special Forces." Said nothing. Silence was answer enough. "Same story, different faces," said softly. "My grandmother was Army intelligence in Berlin, 68. Michael's father was Air Force, enhanced training, extraordinary results." "And you ended up here," said voice even. "Recruited," Michael said bitterly. "I made an impossible shot in Syria, saved my team. Next thing I knew, I was being studied like a lab rat. I came voluntarily," added. "After Afghanistan, I had nowhere else. At least here they understand what I can do." Studied them carefully. Allies or informants? Hard to tell. She kept her voice casual. "So what is Project Artemis really?" Michael glanced around, then leaned closer still. "Officially, advanced training for gifted shooters. Unofficially, they're trying to recreate Olympian, using our bloodlines." Stomach tightened. She masked it with a sip of water. "How many?" she asked softly. "Originally 7 descendants," said. "Now 4. The others didn't make it." "Accidents," Michael said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "That's what they called it." Felt the truth settle like lead. So were the experiments now. Before either could answer, another presence cut into the moment. A man in a black tactical uniform approached. Tall, broad, captain's bars on his chest. His uniform bore the same Artemis insignia but in silver. His eyes were sharp green, intelligent, watchful. "Reed, Wilson, Range Complex B." His voice carried quiet authority. He turned to, "With me, orientation." Michael gave her a look, careful, didn't speak. Rose, the captain moved with economy, no wasted motion. Special Forces, she guessed. He introduced himself only once they were in the corridor. "Captain Alexander Barnes. I oversee training and readiness." Studied him as they walked, calm authority, every step deliberate, dangerous but controlled. "Asset," she repeated. "That word keeps coming up." Barnes' expression didn't change. "Clinical language, I prefer operator, but I don't make the terminology." They passed a wall lined with photographs. 23 men in uniform, Cold War era. Young faces, hard eyes. At the center, William, her grandfather. Stopped, the sight of him, young, strong, before the years of secrets and lies. Her throat tightened. "First generation," Barnes said, noticing her gaze. "The pioneers." Did they even know what they were volunteering for? she asked softly. Barnes studied her for a moment. His answer was quieter, more human than she expected. That's the question, isn't it? Consent means little when even the scientists don't know the cost. He led her onward, his voice carrying a trace of respect. Your grandfather lasted longer than most. Many suffered early neurological collapse. We called it Olympian deterioration. Swallowed hard, William's letter, final stage, accelerated breakdown. And my father's generation, she asked carefully. More stable, but not immune, Barnes said. Genetics integrated, stronger results, different side effects. And me? Barnes stopped, looked her directly in the eye. That's what we're here to find out. The assessment facility was unlike anything had seen. Multiple chambers, each simulating different environments: desert, forest, urban, even Arctic. Targets could appear at ranges from 25 to 2,500 meters. Wind, weather, even atmospheric conditions simulated at will. Barnes handed her an M4 carbine. Standard qualification. Let's start with fundamentals. The test was basic: 40 targets, short to mid-range, deliberately underperformed 36 of 40, excellent by military standards, far below her true ability. Barnes studied her results, eyebrow raised. Not what I expected. Your competition scores were perfect, triple this distance. New environment, she said evenly. New equipment adjusting. Barnes watched her a long moment, then gave a small nod. Smart, never show everything at once. Good instinct. He handed her a Remington M24 sniper rifle. Let's see what William really taught his granddaughter. Settled in, allowed herself to feel. The wind became a current, the targets like points on a map in her mind. She fired 5 shots, 5 hits, center mass, rapid succession. Barnes said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he set the system to maximum, 2,500 meters, wind conditions brutal, the kind of shot deemed impossible. Final evaluation, he said simply. Inhaled, exhaled, and let the world fall away. She felt the bullet before she fired it, not a guess, not a calculation, a connection, environmental integration, William had called it. She squeezed the trigger. The distant target dropped, perfect. When she looked back, Barnes was watching her differently now. Not as an asset, not even as a soldier, with curiosity, maybe even fear. How? He asked softly. Even with Olympian blood, no one has ever. He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. General Wilson will want to see this himself. And in that moment, knew something had shifted. She wasn't just another experiment. She was becoming their obsession. Which meant the danger had only begun. What do you do when people start to fear the very thing you've tried your whole life to hide? Sat in the sterile cafeteria again, but this time the silence wasn't curiosity. It was caution. Her evaluation results had spread faster than wildfire. Soldiers who once stared with curiosity now averted their eyes. Operators who once measured her now gave her distance. Michael Reed slid onto the bench opposite her, lowering his voice. You realize what you did yesterday, don't you? She poked at the eggs on her tray, shot some targets. At 2,500 meters with shifting wind in under 5 seconds. His voice was quiet but urgent. Nobody does that, not even first gen, not even with tech. You didn't just make a shot, you just became the shot. Kept her gaze steady though her stomach nodded. Then maybe they'll let me go, chalk it up as proof of concept. Michael leaned closer, eyes hard. You don't walk away from this. Nobody does. Wilson appeared then, setting down her tray with deliberate calm. She spoke in a whisper only could hear. They'll test you harder now, push you into corners, don't give them everything. Not yet. Fork froze halfway to her mouth. She looked it carefully. For the first time she saw something beneath the sniper's controlled exterior. Fear. Why warn me? Asked softly. His jaw tightened. Because I've seen what happens when they decide you're too valuable to fail. You stop being a person, you become a project, and projects don't get to choose. The announcement came the next morning. Barnes stood in the training hall, his voice carrying across the vast concrete chamber. Operators lined the walls, soldiers at attention. Richards observed from a balcony, tablet in hand. And General Wilson, stone-faced, ribbons heavy on his chest, watched from above like a judge in some ancient trial. Phase 2 begins today, Barnes announced. Comparative evaluations. Operators will engage in simulated environments. Performance will determine placement within Artemis structure. Michael muttered under his breath beside. Translation, competition, survival of the fittest. Barnes' gaze swept the assembled group. You will be graded not only on precision, but decision-making, adaptability, and psychological resilience. His eyes lingered a moment on unreadable. Failure has consequences. They were herded into a chamber that looked like a military kill house on steroids. Multi-level, shifting walls, moving targets, simulated explosions. Screens overhead displayed vitals, accuracy scores, even neural activity. Felt her pulse slow, a strange calm wrapping around her. William had taught her long ago, fear is a tool. Harness it, don't fight it. Michael went first. He moved like a machine, clearing rooms, firing in controlled bursts. He was good, too good. Decades of training behind every shot. His final score flashed on the screen, 92%. Strong. Followed silent lethal. Her movements were pure economy. She made fewer shots, but everyone counted. Her score, 94%. Then came's turn. She stepped into the labyrinth, rifle steady. The world narrowed. Every sound, every vibration, every whisper of air was information. Targets appeared, disappeared, reappeared. She moved instinctively, firing with precision that felt less like aiming and more like inevitability. She cleared the course in record time. Her final score flashed on the screen, 99.7%. The room went still. Michael swore softly under his breath. His expression tightened. Richard scribbled furiously on her tablet, and from the balcony, General Wilson's thin smile said everything. Barnes didn't move, didn't speak, but his eyes lingered on longer than anyone else. When it was over, the group dispersed in silence. Whispers filled the corridors, and felt the weight of a target settling on her back, not from enemies outside, but from those inside. That night she lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. She thought of her father, of Robert, terminated by. Had he been forced into competitions like this? Had he too been measured, graded, reduced to a number? She turned the letter over in her hands again, tracing William's handwriting. Trust no one, not even me. And yet someone had to be trusted. Michael with his bitterness, with her warning. Even Barnes, whose silence sometimes felt like quiet rebellion. But who? Her eyes closed, exhaustion dragging at her. And then footsteps, outside her door, pausing. She held her breath. A slip of paper slid under the door. Quiet, quick, gone. Sat up, heart pounding. She unfolded it carefully. 4 words handwritten in block letters. Is still alive. Her blood turned to ice. The next morning, she confronted Michael quietly, away from cameras in the gym. You wrote this, she showed him the note. He shook his head. Not me, but I've heard the name. He glanced around, lowered his voice. Isn't just an enemy, it's the enemy, the faction that killed your father. Rumor says they infiltrated even here. His breath caught, inside Artemis. Michael's eyes darkened. Wilson pretends he controls this place, but has its fingers everywhere. Some say they were the ones funding Olympian back in the Cold War. Wilson just plays their game. His chest tightened. Then why bring me here? Why not kill me like they did my father? Michael studied her. Maybe you're not meant to be killed. Maybe you're meant to be used. Later that day, Richards led to a private chamber for neurological testing. Wires on her temples, electrodes tracing every flicker of thought. Lights flickered overhead. Your neural activity is 28% above baseline, Richards murmured, almost in awe. Cognitive mapping off the charts. Your brain processes distance like it's touch. Do you realize what that means? Kept her voice steady. That I'm your perfect weapon. Richards hesitated. For the first time, her clinical mask cracked. Something almost human flickered in her eyes. No, it means you're what humanity could be. Studied her carefully. Was it belief or manipulation? Before she could ask, the door opened. General Wilson stepped in, his presence chilling the room. Dr. Richards, leave us. Richards obeyed, tablet clutched tightly, gaze flicking back toward before she vanished through the door. Wilson approached, hands clasped behind his back. His voice was calm, measured. You've surpassed expectations. Your scores place you at the forefront of Artemis, but numbers are not enough. I need loyalty. Met his eyes evenly. Loyalty to what? To you, to Artemis, too. For the briefest second, his expression faltered. A crack in the general's mask. Then it was gone. You've been reading ghosts, he said coldly. Is propaganda, myths spread to discredit our work. Leaned forward, her voice low, dangerous. Then why did they kill my father? Wilson didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. Your father was a mistake, he said finally, one we will not repeat. His heart pounded, but she kept her face unreadable. Wilson leaned closer, his voice a whisper now. You are not here to repeat history. You are here to rewrite it. Remember that. And then he turned, leaving her alone with the hum of machines and the weight of a truth he hadn't meant to reveal. That night stood at the narrow window of her quarters, staring out at the desert. The stars stretched endless above the black horizon. She thought of William, of Robert, of a legacy she never asked for. And she realized something with chilling clarity. Project Artemis wasn't about protecting the future. It was about rewriting the past, controlling the bloodline, harnessing what made her human and stripping it of everything else. And if Wilson was right, if her father had been a mistake, then she knew what they saw in her. Not even a sniper. Just a weapon waiting to be aimed. What happens when the cage starts to look less like protection and more like a stage? Felt it the moment she stepped into the cafeteria the next morning. The atmosphere had shifted. The usual tension, the eyes measuring, weighing, fearing, was replaced with something sharper. Anticipation. Michael sat rigidly at his table, knuckles white around his coffee. Moved with brittle calm, every gesture measured, rehearsed. Even the guards seemed different, postures stiffer, weapons held. She carried her tray quietly, sat in her usual spot, waited. It came over the speakers moments later. Barnes' voice, clipped and formal. All operators report to briefing chamber, 700 sharp, full uniform. Michael's jaw clenched. He leaned toward as they rose. It's not just another evaluation, you'll see. The briefing chamber was cavernous, cold, and sterile, its walls lined with flags and screens. At the center, a long table. Around it sat men and women in suits, government officials, contractors, even foreign dignitaries. Their eyes were sharp, hungry, investors more than allies. His gut tightened. She knew the look. It wasn't respect. It was appraisal. General Wilson stood at the front, posture rigid, presence commanding. Beside him, Richards held her tablet like a priest with a sacred text. Barnes lingered in the shadows, silent, his gaze unreadable. Ladies and, Wilson began, his voice measured, confident, rehearsed. Welcome to Artemis Command. Today, you will witness what years of research and sacrifice have achieved. You will see not just soldiers, but the future of warfare. Stomach turned. She glanced at Michael, whose lips pressed into a thin line. Hands tightened behind her back. Wilson continued, his eyes sweeping across the officials. For decades, our adversaries sought an edge. The Soviets experimented, the Chinese still experiment, but only we succeeded. Project Olympian gave us a foundation. Project Artemis perfects it. and today you will see proof." The words hung in the air like chains. Proof, demonstration. And understood, they weren't just training anymore, they were being showcased. The range was unlike anything had seen before, an open desert expanse carved into a theater. On one side, bleachers of reinforced glass where the officials sat, shaded from the sun. On the other, a series of live-fire zones, vehicles, mock compounds, even moving drone targets. The operators, Michael, and a fourth she hadn't spoken to yet, a wiry man named, were lined up at the firing line, rifles in hand. Cameras mounted above tracked their every move. Barnes briefed them in his usual calm, clipped tone. Targets vary in size, distance, and mobility. Ranges from 100 to 3,200 meters. Speed, precision, and adaptability will be scored. Live fire. No room for error. Michael muttered under his breath, just loud enough for to hear. This isn't training. This is theater. And he was right. Wilson's voice carried across the desert, amplified for the audience. Observe now the culmination of decades. Observe what true human potential looks like when unlocked. His chest tightened. She gripped her rifle, not too tight, not too loose, and let the desert still her. The signal sounded. Michael moved first, efficient and precise. Vehicles erupted in flames, targets fell in clean succession. He worked like the professional he was, no wasted movement, no hesitation. Followed, her shots fewer but devastating. She timed each perfectly, letting silence hang before breaking it with a single lethal crack. Was faster, almost reckless, spraying shots with ferocity that barely stayed on target. His score climbed, but his precision faltered. And then it was turn. She inhaled, let the world quiet. Targets appeared, disappeared, shifted with the desert wind. But she didn't just see them, she felt them. The air currents, the heat shimmer, even the subtle vibrations of distant machinery, all of it mapped itself in her mind. She fired, one shot, one kill, again. At 2,000 meters, the rifle became an extension of her body. At 3,000, it became something deeper, an instinct, a thread of inevitability. The final target, a drone weaving erratically in the high desert wind, dropped from the sky in silence. And when she lowered the rifle, the range was still. Barnes' voice finally broke it. Operator CB01, final accuracy 100%, time record. The officials erupted in murmurs, nods, whispers of disbelief. Wilson stepped forward, his voice rising, triumphant. Ladies, and what you see here is not luck. It is not chance. It is the refinement of a lineage, a weapon beyond technology, a soldier who transcends limits. This is Project Artemis. Applause filled the observation deck. But in his chest there was no pride, only dread. That night she sat in her quarters, the echo of the applause still rattling in her head. She saw their faces again, hungry, calculating. Not all, ownership. A knock at her door broke her thoughts. Barnes stepped in, silent, closing it behind him. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. You made them believers, he said quietly. Kept her tone flat. That was the point, wasn't it? Barnes studied her. You don't understand. Wilson isn't just proving Artemis to the government, he's selling it. Contracts, private deals, foreign interest. Today you weren't demonstrating skill, you were advertising. The words cut sharper than she expected. She felt like a weapon before, but now she understood she was worse. A product. Her voice dropped, hard and quiet. Why are you telling me this? Barnes hesitated, then stepped closer. His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. Because I've seen this before, with your father, with others. They pushed him, showcased him, promised him purpose. And when he refused, Barnes' jaw tightened. They made sure refusal was no longer an option. His breath caught. You knew my father. Barnes nodded slowly. Robert, strong, gifted, more human than any of them wanted to admit. And that was his flaw. He wouldn't let them take away his humanity, saw him as a liability, and liabilities don't last. His voice trembled despite herself. "Why are you telling me this now?" Barnes' gaze was steady, unflinching. "Because I see the same look in your eyes, the same fire, and if you're not careful, you'll end the same way." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Finally spoke, "Then what do I do?" Barnes hesitated, then slid something across the desk. A small device, smooth metal, compact. "Jammer," he said simply. "It disrupts the isotope signal for 12 hours. I shouldn't even have it, but if you're smart, you'll know when to use it." Picked it up carefully, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Why are you helping me?" For the first time, Barnes' mask cracked just slightly. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "Because I couldn't help your father." He left before she could answer, the door ceiling shut behind him. Sat alone, the jammer heavy in her hand. For the first time since Montana, hope flickered. Fragile, dangerous, but real. That night she dreamt of William again. His voice calm, steady, echoing in the darkness. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. When she woke, she knew. She wasn't going to be their weapon. She was going to be their undoing. What if the mission you're sent on isn't meant to protect anyone, but to prove you'll obey? Sat in the back of the armored vehicle, her rifle secured across her lap, the desert night pressing against the reinforced glass. The convoy hummed across the barren expanse, headlights cutting pale scars into the darkness. Beside her, Michael adjusted his gear with quiet precision, while sat still as stone, eyes fixed forward. Tapped his leg nervously, his energy restless, unpredictable. None of them spoke. The silence wasn't discipline, it was dread. At the front, Captain Barnes' voice crackled through the comms. "Operators, final briefing. Objective, secure compound 35 miles north. Intelligence confirms hostile presence. Rules of engagement, neutralize all threats. Collateral tolerance, high." His chest tightened. Collateral tolerance. Cold words for human lives that didn't matter. Wilson's voice had echoed the same message in the earlier briefing. "This is not a war game. This is a demonstration. Show me that you can act without hesitation." It wasn't about victory, it was about obedience. Michael glanced at his expression grim. He didn't have to say it, they both knew. This wasn't a mission, it was a test. The compound loomed out of the desert like a scar, low concrete walls, rusted gates, dim lights flickering in the towers. A village spread just beyond it, mud brick homes scattered under the pale wash of the moon. The convoy stopped a half-mile out. Barnes gave the order. "Operators dismount." Boots hit sand. The air smelled of dust and oil. Adjusted the MRAD slung across her back, heavier than the rifles she'd trained with, but steady, reliable, a beast designed for range and devastation. It was the weapon Wilson had chosen for her tonight, a weapon meant to prove. They moved forward in formation, silent shadows under the desert sky. Then the first shot cracked. A guard slumped from the tower, lowered his rifle, grinning. "Contact initiated," he said into comms. Michael cursed under his breath. Too soon, too loud. Gunfire erupted from the compound. Lights flared. The air split with chaos. "Advance," Barnes barked. They surged forward, dropped 3 targets in clean succession. Michael flanked left, his movements methodical, deliberate, charged ahead recklessly, spraying rounds. And she climbed the ridge to higher ground, setting up her MRAD. The world stilled through her scope, every breath, every heartbeat, a calculation. But what she saw made her freeze. Not just armed men in the compound, civilians in the village beyond, scattering in terror as gunfire spilled into the night. Families dragged children into doorways. Women shielded the elderly with their bodies. Collateral tolerance. Her chest burned. She could hear William's voice in memory. "Your gift isn't about killing, it's about choice. Never forget that." Through her scope, she tracked a hostile moving toward the village with an RPG. She fired. One shot, clean, he fell. Another target setting up a heavy machine gun on the wall. She fired, dropped. But then her scope landed on something else. A boy, 12, maybe 13, scrambling with a rifle too big for him, terror etched into his face. Forced into this fight, not choosing it. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Wilson's voice crackled in her earpiece, calm, commanding. Target him. Prove you won't hesitate. Her chest clenched. She could feel eyes on her. Cameras, drones, data recording every hesitation, every breath. Prove you won't hesitate. The boy stumbled, the rifle slipping from his hands. He wasn't a soldier. He was a child. His hands shook. She lowered the scope. No shot, she said, voice steady but defiant. Wilson's voice hardened. Repeat that, operator. His pulse hammered, but she kept her tone calm. No shot, non-combatant. The silence in her comms was louder than the gunfire below. Then Barnes' voice cut in, sharp and commanding. Adjust. New priority, rooftop east, RPG confirmed. Pivoted instantly, fired, neutralized. The moment passed, but not unnoticed. By dawn, the compound was secured. Smoke curled from burning vehicles. Bodies lay scattered, some armed, some not. The village was eerily quiet, doors sealed, windows shuttered, fear lingering like smoke. The operators regrouped at the convoy, was buzzing, adrenaline high. Did you see that? Fastest breach in record time. We crushed it. Michael's face was grim, his eyes shadowed. Crushed more than you realize. Said nothing, but her gaze lingered on, a flicker of something unreadable, respect, maybe warning. Barnes gave no debrief, only silence, eyes unreadable as they loaded into the vehicle. And Wilson's voice over comms, returned to base. Back at the facility, was summoned to Wilson's office before she could even change uniform. The general stood at the window, desert sun spilling across the floor. He didn't turn when she entered. You hesitated, he said simply. Kept her tone neutral. The target was a child, non-combatant. Wilson turned, his gaze cold, his voice sharp. A combatant is anyone holding a weapon. A soldier who hesitates endangers the mission. You compromise the demonstration. Met his stare, her voice steady. I protected the mission. I neutralized real threats. I prevented civilian casualties. That's the job, isn't it? Wilson stepped closer, his presence heavy, his eyes unblinking. Your job is obedience. Leave morality to politicians. You were bred for precision, not compassion. His jaw tightened. Inside, her rage burned, but her voice remained calm. If you want a machine, General, build one. I'm human. That's why I can do what I do. The silence between them was suffocating. Finally, Wilson's lips curved into something between a sneer and a smile. Defiance, just like your father. The words cut deep, but she didn't flinch. Wilson leaned closer, his whisper like a blade. Do not make his mistake. And then he dismissed her with a flick of his hand. That night sat in her quarters, hands clenched around the jammer Barnes had given her. 12 hours of invisibility, 12 hours of freedom if she dared. Her heart pounded with the weight of it, the choice, the risk. She thought of the boy in the village, eyes wide with terror. She thought of her father gunned down for refusing to obey. She thought of William's words, sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She pressed the button. The jammer hummed softly in her palm. For the first time since she'd been taken, the cameras above her were blind, the trackers silent, and slipped into the shadows of Facility 7, unseen, unheard, determined. Not to escape, not yet, but to uncover the truth. What do you do when the truth you've been hunting stares back at you in a mirror you wish you never looked into? The corridor was silent except for the low hum of the jammer in his pocket. Its faint vibration was her shield, masking her from the facility's relentless eyes. For the first time since Montana, She wasn't being watched. She moved with care, footsteps soft against sterile tile. The uniform helped, just another gray figure in the night shift if anyone glanced her way. But every second mattered. 12 hours of freedom, no more. Her path wasn't random. She'd memorized the movements of guards, the timing of cameras, the rhythm of locked doors. Every meal, every drill, every corridor she'd walked since arriving had been data. And now, it was her weapon. She slipped through a side stairwell into 3, a restricted zone she'd marked weeks ago. The keypad flashed red when she tried a code she'd stolen. She exhaled, adjusted, tried again. Green. The door hissed open. Inside, silence. Cold. Rows of filing cabinets sealed behind glass. Screens dimmed to standby. The air smelled of dust and antiseptic. She approached the central terminal. Fingers trembling, she plugged in the override chip she'd lifted from Richard's lab. The screen flickered, lines of code spilling down before giving way to files. Project Artemis classified. Her pulse hammered, she opened one. Subject Robert RB04. Her father's file. She forced herself to read. His training logs, his scores, his genetic breakdown, notes on enhanced sensory perception and targeting integration. Clinical language stripping away humanity until only metrics remained. And at the bottom, termination order, clearance. Breath caught, she read it again and again. The words didn't change. Her father's death hadn't been an accident, it hadn't even been Artemis alone. It had been sanctioned, ordered. By. Her stomach twisted, rage, grief, disbelief all colliding. She opened another file. William, her grandfather, the pioneer. Notes about neurological collapse, blood degradation, irreversible psychological fragmentation. His final stage. And another file, hers, CB01. Projected outcomes. Neural activity 37% above baseline. Highest recorded target integration. And beneath that, cold as stone, viability rating, primary candidate for prototype. Subject retention mandatory. Consent irrelevant. Her vision blurred. For a moment she thought she might tear the screen from the wall, but then she saw another folder. Not Artemis, not Olympian. Her breath caught, she opened it. Dozens of files, meetings, transactions, transfers, and names she recognized: Wilson, Richards, Barnes. Barnes. Her chest tightened, she clicked. The file was heavily redacted, but enough remained. Barnes Alexander, operative liaison, asset retention operations, clearance. Her hands froze on the keyboard. The man who had given her the jammer. The man who'd spoken of her father with respect. The man who'd told her to be careful. Linked to the very faction that had destroyed her family. Her stomach lurched. A sound behind her made her spin. Michael stood in the doorway, face shadowed, expression unreadable. "How long have you been following me?" whispered. "Long enough," he said. His voice was quiet, heavy. "I warned you not to dig too deep." She glared. "You knew." Michael stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Of course I knew. We all do in pieces. We just don't admit it, not out loud, not where they can hear." Her voice broke. "They killed my father, and Barnes is one of them." Michael's eyes flickered, pained. "Barnes is complicated. He's been playing both sides for years. You think you're the only one he slipped tools to. He gave me something once too. Tried to save others before you. Doesn't make him clean, but it doesn't make him a monster either." Shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Then what does it make him?" Michael's voice lowered, rough. "A survivor and maybe a coward." The door opened again. Slipped inside, her gaze sharp, wary. "I knew I'd find you here." She glanced at the files, her jaw tightening. "So, now you know." Turned on her. "You knew too." His expression softened just slightly. "We're all trapped in this. Wilson, Richards, Barnes, they're pieces of something bigger you think is just an enemy. No, it is Artemis, always has been. This whole project exists because of them. Without them, none of us would be standing here. Stomach churned. So what, you just accept it? His voice hardened. What choice do we have? Run and they'll hunt us. Fight and they'll bury us. You want to live, learn to bend before they break you. Shook her head, voice trembling but fierce. No, I won't bend. I won't be their weapon. His eyes softened just for a heartbeat, a flicker of something like admiration. Then you'd better be ready to die for that. Back in her quarters, sat with her head in her hands, the jammer silent now, the cameras awake again. She thought of her father, his death sealed in a line of text, his defiance ended by a clearance code. She thought of William, his final stage written in clinical detachment. She thought of herself, her consent irrelevant. And she thought of Barnes, the man who had given her hope, now revealed as tethered to the same darkness that had destroyed her family. But beneath the pain, something sharper was taking root, a clarity. She wasn't going to run, not yet. She wasn't going to break. She was going to wait, to act when the moment mattered most. Because she understood now, the greatest weapon had created wasn't her bloodline. It was their belief that they owned it. And she was going to prove them wrong. Dawn broke harsh and bright over the desert, joined Michael and in the range, faces blank for the watching cameras. Barnes stood at the edge giving instructions, his voice steady. But when his eyes flicked to hers, saw it, the tiniest hesitation, a shadow of guilt. She held his gaze, didn't blink. And for the first time, he looked away. What if your whole life was built to end in one single shot? The desert stretched endless beneath the burning sun, shimmering in waves of heat. Lay prone on a ridge of rock, the MRAD steady against her shoulder, her cheek pressed to the stock, breath measured, heartbeat slow. Through the scope she could see the compound 2 miles away. Guard towers, patrols, armored vehicles. Beyond it, a gathering of officials, politicians, contractors, shadow brokers, brought together by Wilson himself. It wasn't just a demonstration. It was a transaction. Barnes' voice had delivered the briefing with its usual calm. Today, Artemis proves its reach. Long-range interdiction, record-breaking, a 3,000-meter kill. And knew then this wasn't about an enemy. It wasn't about security. It was about her. They wanted her to fire a shot that would echo across boardrooms and battlefields. A human headline, a crown on Wilson's empire. She adjusted her scope. The target wasn't even hostile. It was a condemned prisoner, shackled in the sand, placed like a prop beneath the watch of cameras and dignitaries. A life reduced to spectacle. Michael's voice crackled in her earpiece, steady, quiet. Don't do it, not like this. His voice followed, calm but hard. If you refuse, they'll erase you. Right here, right now, you know that. Wilson's voice cut through them both, cold, commanding. Operator CB-01, engage, prove Artemis is unstoppable. His finger hovered over the trigger. The world narrowed to her scope. The prisoner's head bowed in the dust, the crowd waiting, Wilson watching. And in her mind, William's voice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She lowered her rifle. No shot, she said into comms. The silence that followed was deadly. Then Wilson's voice, sharp as a blade. That was not a request. The roar of engines cut through the air. Drones shifted overhead. Soldiers moved into position. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Michael's voice broke it, now. But wasn't looking at the prisoner anymore. Her scope shifted, rising past the sand, past the compound, to the glass tower where Wilson stood, commanding, watching, smiling. Her breath slowed. 1 heartbeat, 2. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The sound cracked across the desert like thunder. Through the scope she saw the glass shatter, saw Wilson's expression freeze. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of fear, before the round tore through him. The crowd erupted in chaos. Alarms blared. Soldiers shouted. Drones pivoted wildly. but was already moving, rolling from the ridge, vanishing into the rocks. Her single shot had rewritten everything. The desert was chaos. Michael covered her flank, firing controlled bursts as soldiers scrambled to locate them. Moved like a shadow, silent and lethal, cutting down those who came too close. Wild-Eyed had joined the fight with reckless abandon, shouting curses as he rained fire, but knew it was already too late for him. His loyalty had always been chaos, not cause. Barnes' voice erupted over comms, harsher than she'd ever heard. "What have you done?" His reply was steady. "I ended the transaction." His silence was brief, sharp. Then, "You have no idea what comes next." But she did. For the first time she did. She wasn't running from their control anymore. She was breaking it. The escape was brutal, carved through sand and steel. Drones strafed the ridges, gunships roared overhead, but the jammer in his pocket disrupted just enough to keep them slipping through cracks. Michael's precision, silence, instinct, they moved like threads in the same weave. By nightfall, they had reached the abandoned outskirts of a ruined village. Fires burned in the distance. The compound they'd left behind was still screaming with sirens. Michael collapsed against a wall, chest heaving. "You just declared war on Artemis, on everyone." His hands shook as she reloaded, but her voice was calm. "No, I declared that I won't be their weapon." Stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "Then neither will I." Michael let out a dry laugh. "You two are insane." But there was something in his eyes too, something like relief. Later that night, sat alone, the MRAD across her knees, staring into the desert sky. She thought of her father, of his refusal, of his death written in clearance codes. She thought of William, his brilliance turned to madness in sterile files. She thought of Wilson, his belief that control was destiny. And she thought of the boy in the village, the rifle too heavy for his hands, the fear in his eyes. Her shot today hadn't just killed a man, it had broken a chain. She didn't know what came next, whether they would survive the week, the night, even the dawn, would hunt them. Artemis would brand them traitors. The world would twist the story to fit its appetite. But she knew this, she had chosen. For the first time, the shot wasn't theirs, it was hers. At dawn, Barnes found her. He stepped into the ruins quietly, his hands empty, his face drawn. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You've signed your death warrant." Met his gaze. "So did my father, so did William, and maybe so will I, but it's mine to sign." Barnes' jaw tightened. There was pain in his eyes, guilt too deep to hide. "You don't understand how far this goes." Stood slinging the MRAD over her shoulder. "Then let them come. Let them try to take it back. They'll learn what my father already knew." She stepped closer, her voice a whisper that cut like steel. "You can't own a soul." Barnes lowered his eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked small, human. He turned without another word, disappearing into the desert. The three of them, Michael, moved on as the sun rose. No orders, no chains, just the horizon ahead, wide and unclaimed. Their future wasn't written in files anymore. It wasn't bound to clearance codes or projects. It was written in choice. And though the world would remember for one impossible shot at 3,000 meters, she knew the truth. It wasn't the distance that mattered. It was the defiance. The narrator's voice softened. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't argue or beg or explain. It simply acts.